Every time that I go to the octagon, I don't want to just hold the guy. I don't want to just hang. I don't want to buy time. I want to finish the guy.
If you live in a glass house, you don't throw stones. Obviously, Gilbert Burns didn't get the memo. He thought he could trash talk his way to the welterweight championship, and boy, did he get a reality check?
I mean, the jab led the whole show in that round. Usman's so calm and patient, and look at that pullback right hand, trying to throw those big overhands and not allowing Usman to get to go.
In today's video, we'll rehash the destruction of the cocky fighter Gilbert Burns. Gilbert's journey to the top of the welterweight division was fueled by raw talent, relentless work ethic, and an ever-growing sense of invincibility. He wasn't just another Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ace trying to survive in the UFC. He was evolving into a complete fighter, one who could submit you on the ground or knock you unconscious on the feet. But as his skills sharpened, so did his confidence. And as the wins piled up, that confidence started morphing into something else. Cockiness.
I know I can submit him anywhere, anytime, in the bottom, on the top, in the cage, anywhere. He knows I can submit him. He might watch out for this because he knows. Like he said, oh, people know who's gonna win. He said, yeah, they know. Yeah, he knows. He knows you.
In the beginning, Gilbert was humble, grinding away in the shadows, known mostly for his grappling background. He made his UFC debut in 2014 as a lightweight, and while he had moments of brilliance, he never quite looked like championship material. His striking was basic, his game plan was predictable, and he suffered frustrating losses to opponents like Rashid Magomedov and Dan Hooker. Gilbert was talented, no doubt, but he was far from the unstoppable force he would later believe himself to be. Then came the move to welterweight. It was a decision that would change everything. Free from the brutal weight cuts, Gilbert looked faster, stronger, and more explosive. He wasn't just winning, he was dominating. First, he overwhelmed Alexei Kunchenko, a tough Russian fighter who had never lost before. Next, he outclassed Gunnar Nelson, a respected submission artist. But it was his brutal knockout of Demian Maia, a legend in the grappling world, that sent a clear message to the division. Gilbert wasn't just a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy anymore. He had power, and he wasn't afraid to use it. This is where the cockiness started creeping in. After years of fighting in the background, Gilbert was now a real threat, and he knew it. He carried himself differently, spoke with more authority, and began dismissing opponents with an air of superiority. But it was his fight against former champion Tyron Woodley that truly inflated his ego. Woodley, once the king of the division, was expected to be too experienced, too powerful, and too composed for Gilbert. Instead, Gilbert turned him into a punching bag. For 5 rounds, he battered the former champ, out-striking him, out-wrestling him, and walking away with a lopsided victory. After that, Gilbert wasn't just confident. He was convinced he was unstoppable. He started talking about Kamaru Usman, the reigning welterweight champion, as if his victory over him was already written in stone. Gilbert had trained with Usman for years at Sanford MMA, and he believed that gave him an edge no one else had. He claimed he knew Usman's weaknesses, his tendencies, his breaking points. He spoke as if he had already beaten him in his mind. In interviews, Gilbert dismissed the idea that Usman could handle his power. He even suggested that Usman was avoiding him, afraid of what he knew.
When it comes to talking, I will simply state what I'm capable of and what I will do. And I said it. I told Tyron Woodley, he asked me at the press conference, what are you going to do better than me? And I said everything. I will dominate you from start to finish. And I did that to Tyron Woodley. Colby Covington said the same thing. What are you going to do? I'm going to leave you on a stretcher, this, and this. And I told him, I will punish you for 4.5 rounds, and I will finish you. And I did just that. Masvidal said the same thing. He's going to baptize me. He's going to do this and that. And I told him, you are the same journeyman you've always been. I will dominate you on my worst day. And what happened? I did just that. So I just state the facts. I state what I'm able to do. I don't have to be boastous. You know, I don't have to boast about it or be braggadocious. I know what I'm capable of, and that's what I state.
The stage was set. UFC 258. The former training partners were now rivals. Gilbert walked into fight week with the energy of a man who had already seen the outcome, one where he left the octagon as the new welterweight champion. But as history has proven, the fight game has a cruel way of humbling those who think they have it all figured out. Gilbert Burns believed this was his moment. What he didn't realize was that Kamaru Usman was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. The welterweight division was on fire, and you knew this was the fight to watch. Two former teammates, now bitter rivals, set to collide in a showdown fueled by history, betrayal, and the hunger for greatness. On one side, Kamaru Usman, the reigning champion, the most dominant force in the division, a man who had dismantled everyone in his path. On the other, Gilbert Burns, the former sparring partner who had spent years training by Usman's side, convinced he had the secret to breaking him. You could feel the tension long before they even stepped into the octagon. This wasn't just another title fight. This was personal. Gilbert had always been in Usman's shadow, grinding in the background while Usman took over the division. But when Gilbert moved up to welterweight, everything changed. He wasn't just a grappler anymore. He was knocking people out, embarrassing former champions, and making it clear he was coming for the throne. He destroyed Demian Maia with a vicious knockout. He humiliated Tyron Woodley over 5 dominant rounds. And after that, he started talking. You saw it happening. Gilbert wasn't just confident, he was cocky. He claimed he knew Usman better than anyone. He said he had trained with him for years, studied his weaknesses, and figured out the exact way to take him out.
I know his game. I know his strength, his weakness. I know clear what I have to do.
It wasn't a matter of if he would win, but how. Every interview, every stare down, every moment leading up to the fight, Gilbert carried himself like a man who had already won. The UFC knew they had something special on their hands. They originally scheduled the fight for UFC 251, but just days before the event, Gilbert tested positive for COVID-19. Usman fought Jorge Masvidal instead, successfully defending his belt. But Gilbert wasn't going anywhere. He healed up, trained even harder, and kept the same energy, talking as if he already had Usman figured out, as if his victory was inevitable. That's what made UFC 258 so intense. This wasn't just a title fight, it was a reckoning. You watched the pre-fight press conference, and you could see the fire in Gilbert's eyes. He truly believed he was the one to break Usman. He dismissed the champion's dominance, saying he had been waiting for this moment for years. And Usman? He didn't flinch. He had heard all of this before. He had been doubted, underestimated, and disrespected by every challenger. And every single time, he had made them pay. But here's what really made this fight massive. The money. Usman, as the champion, was set to earn at least $600,000 just to show up, with pay-per-view points that could push his final payout over $1.5 million. Gilbert, as the challenger, was looking at $350,000, with potential bonuses that could take him close to $1 million. But the real prize wasn't the money. It was the belt. For Gilbert, this was everything. For Usman, this was just another night of proving people wrong. You knew something special was coming. The hype, the history, the bad blood, it all led to this moment. The question wasn't just who would win. The question was whether Gilbert was as good as he thought he was, or if he was just another cocky fighter about to get humbled in front of the world. The fight took place at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada, on February 13, 2021. But unlike the electric stadiums packed with roaring crowds that usually accompany fights of this magnitude, this one was different. The COVID-19 pandemic meant a limited audience, no thousands of fans screaming in unison, no deafening chants shaking the arena. Instead, it was eerily quiet, with only the select few in attendance: coaches, UFC officials, and broadcast teams witnessing the showdown up close. You didn't have the roar of a sold-out T-Mobile arena, but you could feel the tension in the air. Despite the smaller crowd, millions were watching. UFC 258 pulled in an estimated 300,000 pay-per-view buys, a solid number considering the circumstances. The anticipation was high. This was a fight built on history, and everyone wanted to see what happened when two former teammates, both at the peak of their careers, finally squared off under the bright lights. Inside the Apex, the atmosphere was surreal. With fewer distractions from the crowd, every sound was magnified. The sharp smacks of punches, the heavy breathing, the coaches yelling instructions. You could hear every movement, every impact, every moment of struggle between the two fighters. It was intimate, raw, and brutal. And then the fight began. Gilbert came out like a man possessed. He had been talking for months about how he would beat Usman, and now he wanted to prove it. In the opening moments, he delivered a right hand that cracked Usman's skull like a lightning bolt. For a split second, you thought Gilbert had it. Usman staggered backward, clearly stunned, and Gilbert rushed in, swinging wildly, trying to finish the job. This was his chance. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But Usman didn't panic. He didn't fold. He absorbed the storm and adjusted. That's what champions do. Gilbert had emptied his clip too early, and Usman made him pay for it. As the fight progressed, you saw the shift. Usman's jab, sharp, precise, and relentless, began to break Gilbert down. With each shot, Gilbert's confidence started to fade. His movements slowed. His breathing became heavier. The cockiness he had carried into the fight was now replaced with something else: desperation. Then came the second round. Usman's jab was landing at will, punishing Gilbert every time he tried to advance. You could see it in his eyes. Gilbert was realizing that the man standing in front of him wasn't just his former training partner. This was a champion in his prime, a man who had spent years silencing doubters, and he was about to do it again. By the third round, Gilbert was broken. Usman smelled blood and went in for the kill. A perfectly placed right hand sent Gilbert crashing to the canvas, and this time there was no escape. Usman pounced, raining down punches until the referee had no choice but to step in and stop the fight. It was over. Gilbert, the man who had been so sure he would win, lay face down on the canvas, defeated. Usman stood over him, victorious once again, proving that no matter how well you think you know him, no matter how confident you are, stepping into the octagon with the Nigerian Nightmare is a different reality. Gilbert had walked in cocky. He walked out humbled. If you enjoyed this video, witness the destruction of cocky fighter in Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor.